All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, June 11th, here at about 8 o'clock in the a.m. We are here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation for our latest Energy for All Alaska Task Force. And we have some august guests this morning here to give us an update relative to the Alaska Gasline and its development. Here in the room, we do have some physical guests. Of course, we have community super volunteer Roger Burgraff. Good morning, sir. We have former Center President Mr. Gene Theriault, and we have the audacious Katie Yarrow with the Interior Gas Utility. So perfect that you're here. Well, all right. Well, I won't steal any thunder. So, Mr. Richards, Mr. Galvin, good morning, and the floor is yours.
Good morning.
Thank you, Jomo. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the update that I'll be providing on the gas line and be able to hand it over to Pat where you can talk about the prospects of Great Bear Pantheon is found on the North Slope. So, Jomo, you're driving the presentation, so I'll ask you to go to the next slide, please. So the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation, which I'm the president of, was given the responsibility. I'm not sure if Gene was the Senate president at the time, but he's been around this for some time, looking for ways to be able to commercialize the North Slope natural gas resources and bring them to Alaskans. Primarily to be able to provide a lower cost energy source, but also to provide for long-term energy security. And so where we find ourselves today is that Cook Inlet, again, in the steep decline in production that the producers are experiencing there, is providing great uncertainty into South Central Alaska, including utilities as far away as Fairbanks. So those utilities are looking for alternative supplies of energy to be able to meet their needs coming in the latter part of this decade and then out into the future. And we've been working with them to look for options to meet their delivery needs, utilizing this project that's called the Alaska LNG project. And this project is, again, the long-standing project to go through large-scale development to be able to provide gas within the state, but also for export. And so with that, then, we have permitted the project and gone through the gauntlet of the federal regulatory regime, as well as the state. And so we find ourselves with a project that has a pipeline component, and we feel this is a good opportunity to be able to advance what we call the first phase of that project to provide for energy needs within Alaska. So next slide, please, Jim. So the North Slope gas, again, is out there. It's proven, it's available for use by Alaskans. And the phase one of this project is to be able to provide that gas at a more rapid time frame, as early as 2029, to be able to bring lower cost gas to Alaskans, but only if it can meet or beat the price of imported liquefied natural gas that would be delivered into South Central Alaska as an alternative. But the building out of the first phase of the project allows for the future expansion and ultimately the future LNG exports that will help bring even lower cost gas for Alaskans. So we feel that this phasing of this project provides then a credible long-term opportunity for Alaska to be able to move forward. And that credibility is really based on the regulatory process that we've gone through, the court challenges that have been thrown at us, but have been pushed back on. So we feel that we've got a robust project that has luckily not been the victim of any of the Biden administration actions that we've seen on oil and gas developments within the state of Alaska. And quite to the contrary, they've actually been helping to support this project through, as I said, the court filings by the Center for Biological Diversity and Sierra Club against the authorizations that came out under the Trump administration. So I have to reiterate, because this is one of the things that with those authorizations, we can't just parse out individual components of the project, and so we have to look at the overall project in its total. And so that's why the first phase of the project would be building the gas pipeline first. So that would bring gas from the North Slope down through the state of Alaska with an offtake into Fairbanks and ultimately into South Central Alaska, with phase two then being the full build out of the project, which would be there for LNG export capabilities. So next slide, please, Jim. So this slide really just represents the where we are in terms of the pipeline. Again, if you look on the top, North Slope, the existing units from Point Thompson and Prudhoe Bay were the two operating units that were the key to being able to move this project forward because of the 40 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that resides within those two operating units. So with Point Thompson, there will be a transmission line 62 miles from Point Thompson over to Prudhoe Bay. And Prudhoe Bay was going to be the start of the Alaska LNG project, where we have a gas treatment facility and then a pipeline leading south to Nikiski. For this first phase, we're looking at a pipeline that would lead from the North Slope, whether it be from the sources I just described or from this new supply source that Great Bear Pantheon is developing, through the state of Alaska, tying in with a lateral to Fairbanks and ultimately to the existing N-Star Beluga pipeline system that serves South Central Alaska. So it's a shorter pipeline. It's about 740 miles as opposed to the full 807 miles because we're not going the full distance to Nikiski. We're not having to cross Cook Inlet, and we're not having to build the compressor stations. So it is a subset of the overall project, and that's why we call it the first phase. Next slide, please.
So looking at my wall where we keep the News Miner article from 1958 that says gas to Fairbanks, I see that Gubic is just south of Prudhoe Bay, and that the star on the map is not at Prudhoe Bay, but looks more foothillsy. Is that fair?
It is fair, and again, Pat's going to be able to describe the location of their two prospects, Akun and Kodiak, and the proximity, if you wouldn't mind, talking about where it is farther to the east of Gubic, but in directly along the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, directly along the Dalton Highway, and directly along the state right-of-way that was provided to AGDC for the natural gas pipeline.
So delightfully close to existing infrastructure.
Directly adjacent to existing.
Right. Sorry, I've been doing this too long, Frank. Okay. I would, at this moment, since I just interjected, remind everyone that this is for you. It's not the Jumbo Stewart Show. We're just in the room. So if you have any questions or any comments, I actually do have both screens working. So you can put up your hand and I'll acknowledge you, or you can put your question in the chat, or you can just go ahead and take yourself off of mute and fire away. Frank is an old hand at this. All right. So if there are no further questions at this juncture, we'll move on. Okay.
I'd like to reiterate to everybody again, feel free when I'm giving my presentation, raise your questions. I'll be glad to address them as they come up on the individual slides.
All right, thank you, Mr. President.
So next slide, please, Jim. All right, so phase one, again, as I talked about earlier, the project that has been permitted was the full Alaska LNG project with a 3.3 billion cubic foot natural gas pipeline leading from Prudhoe Bay south to Nikiski. So that is a 42-inch diameter pipeline, far larger than we would need for gas delivery for Alaskans. Right now we're looking at total volumes for Alaska of about 300 million standard cubic feet a day. So that's about 1/10 or less than the total volumes that we originally designed this project for. However, to be able to provide that gas to Alaskans at the earliest possible date, it means that we have to go forward with the design that we have and has been permitted. So that's why we left the diameter at 42-inch, because it's, again, the first initial phase of the project, with the ultimate goal, full build out of the project, to be able to have that export capability to deliver liquefied natural gas to the Asian markets. So the key to this is those permits that have been granted to the Alaska LNG project. With that, then we have kept our cost estimates nearly up to date. To latest estimate was in $2023. And with that, then, is the opportunity that what I call a credible natural North American pipeline company named Enbridge to come in and lead this project through the final design, ultimately construction and operation of this project. The resources are there. You'll learn more about Pat, what Great Bear Pantheon has found. And then the announcement that we put out last week, where we've signed what's known as a GSP, or Gas Sales Precedent Agreement, with Pantheon Resources for up to 500 million standard cubic feet of natural gas from the Pantheon prospects. This project will only go forward if there are existing or contracts that we will execute that will underpin the financing of the project. So this means that we need not only the utilities within the state of Alaska, but ultimately an industrial customer. And that's, again, a large consumer of gas that would essentially be value-added product that would then be sold onto the world market. So, for instance, there are existing plants in the Kiski that have been mothballed, waiting for gas at a lower cost to be able to restart. One of them is an ammonia plant, one of them is an LNG export facility. So our goal is to be able to provide gas, to be able to at prices so that we can secure those industrial customers, meet the utility prices feeding imported LNG, but ultimately to be able to provide for industry in Alaska to be able to regenerate itself and move forward. And
if you don't mind, Frank, you mentioned the updated cost estimate, but it got a little garbled. What was that number?
So the pipeline portion of this project is going to be $10.8 billion.
So 10.8, $11 billion.
So that's
okay.
On a cost estimate that we completed at the end of fiscal year, the calendar year 2023.
Oh, so fairly recent.
So the front-end engineering design that we need to complete over the next, let's say, 12 months, we'll update that. We'll get price quotes from EPC, the engineering, procurement, construction contractors, that will then validate those cost estimates and the economics of it.
Gene.
Frank, you said that you're sticking with the current diameter, and that's a requirement so that you don't have to go to get permit modifications. Does that mean that you've got to go with that diameter for the entire length, or would there be the potential of having a smaller pipe in the ditch? Because the load that you're serving, I mean, you could come 42 inches all the way down into the interior, and then you don't know, is there going to be an industrial load that you would branch off and to go to Delta, or all the way to Coquitlam? Do you have to build the 42 the entire length?
Very good question, Gene, because we looked at the regulatory scenarios of changing the diameter, whether it be for the full length of the project or sub-segments of the project. And the regulatory risk we saw would be to reopen the environmental document. For this project, it was an environmental impact statement that was led by Corp. As we all know, once you open up that federal document again, then the process within the federal agencies, but also the public process and opportunities for stakeholders to engage can lengthen and become very costly and become very, it would be very time consuming to be able to get that reauthorization done. So that's why we stayed with the 42-inch, because we know that ultimately it will meet the overall design of the project for export, and that it can be quickly move forward to execution to build.
Burgraff.
Yeah, well, I would presume that with a 42-inch pipeline, hopefully we'll be able to get some customers, to use, the natural gas. So, and I'm pleased to see that other sources haven't tried to stop it. We went through a lot of effort in trying to get that permit approved, and I'm glad to see it's still considered valid and that we can move ahead on it. The natural gas supplies, there's, questions as to available from different sources. And of course, with the world situation the way it is now, it's would be advisable for the free world to at least have a source of natural gas without having to depend upon Russia or some other nation filling that void.
Agreed. So, oh, please, Frank.
I concur with your sentiments. Again, the resources that Alaskans know exist on our North Slope are so tremendous, and then what you'll hear from Pat is expanding. So we feel that we are in the opportunity is there to be able to bring those to the world market. It requires, though, again, that the market conditions be there to be able to support the development of this project, because we're truly looking for the entities to be able to come into this project that will carry this forward with their resources and their finances to be able to bring this project to fruition. Now,
So I do have a comment and two questions. I mean, the market conditions have markedly changed since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They were a major supplier of energy to Western Europe, and they no longer are. Have we been working on possible supply to Europe? I mean, we've always thought of this as an Asia-centric project, but it looks like the European market has opened up considerably.
You're absolutely correct in what has happened after the invasion is the major pivot that Europe and their energy producers have gone through to shift back to essentially fossil fuels, including coal, to be able to meet their needs because that Russian gas was cut off. Luckily for Europe, the United States, with its abundance of natural gas in the lower 48 and the expansion of LNG export facilities from the U.S. Gulf Coast, was able to meet the needs of energy within Europe. So their proximity to Europe is far shipper. It's a direct shipping right across the Atlantic to be able to meet the LNG, to take the liquefied natural gas from Texas and Louisiana directly into the import facilities on that west coast of Europe. For us to really get to Europe, it's a very far shipping distance. So our market is truly Asia, and Asia itself has been reliant on some Russian gas, and those buyers of that Russian gas want to have a credible source from a free market, and certainly an ally is more preferred than having to rely on Russian gas.
Okay, so we do have a question online, and in regards to compressor stations, how many compressor stations were included in the full plan versus this smaller initial load plan?
So thanks to Ray for that question. The full Alaska LNG project had 8 compressor stations, and those compressor stations were to move the full 3.3 billion standard cubic feet of natural gas from Prudhoe Bay to Nipisky. The phase 1 project, there'll be a head compressor station that will deliver gas into the project, and then no compressor stations necessary to deliver that gas then into Fairbanks and the South Central.
Okay. And you mentioned about 300 million cubic feet a day of in-state demand currently, or actually was that currently, or did that include the potentiality of, say, a restarted Agrium ammonia plant, fertilizer plant, the LNG export facility, and a restart?
So if you go to my next slide, Jomo, you're
Yes, sir.
So what Jomo is talking about is, again, for us to get to a successful final investment decision, it means that the off-takers of the gas have to be able to commit to the long-term purchase of that gas. So the utilities themselves, in regards to NSTAR, Chugach Electric, Matanuska Electric, Homer Electric, and to a certain extent the utilities in Fairbanks, they average about 200 plus million standard cubic feet a day. So we will need those utilities to sign up for those contracts, and it will take them in their credit, their balance sheets to be able to underpin those contracts. Hopefully, all combined, they'll be able to do that. But we throw in a caveat that truly there may be some need for some state credit support for some of those utilities that may not have the balance sheets to be able to underpin that finance. For us to move
And can I ask a quick question? I'm so sorry. Speaking of the utilities signing on, the 10.8 investment, is that including the spur to Fairbanks?
No, that's not. That's
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So for the additional need to get the final investment decision is a pipeline company, in this case, Enbridge, who would then sign the contracts for the transport of that gas. And then we need a low-cost North Slope gas supply. And that's where Pat's going to talk about his prospects here in a minute. But as I started to say, the utilities are about 200 million standard cubic feet. In order to get to that 300 million, we're going to need one of the following. That's either the nutrient facility, which is Jerma described is the owner of the existing ammonia urea plant, to be able to restart that. So that means that they'll have to look at what it's going to take to reestablish the production in that facility, to bring themselves up to their operating conditions, and what it's going to take for them to take their own final investment decision on that plan. Or conversely, it could be that there is an LNG developer that comes in and looks at phasing of the LNG development to be able to start with a smaller number of units or smaller number of trains that would consume 100, 200, 500 million standard cubic feet a day to be able to jumpstart the LNG production in Nikiski. Or conversely, there are other opportunities, whether it be mine developments or LNG export from existing facilities that folks want to look to consume gas coming off this project. But to get to that 300 million standard cubic feet a day, it's going to take all of those efforts to be able to come to a successful decision to be able to sign the long-term contracts to underpin the financing.
So 2 questions. Well, it looks like maybe even a third. So I guess the first one is, how much extra for the Fairbanks spur? Do we have an estimate for that? We had an estimate for that, but we don't have an updated estimate for that.
That's correct. So I'll just give you a little bit of history lesson. When AGDC was created, we were given the initial charge to look at the delivering gas from Prudhoe Bay to Fairbanks in interior Alaska and to South Central Alaska. And we worked on the design of what is called the Alaska Standalone Pipeline Project. That was a 36-inch diameter project with a lateral leading into Fairbanks. So essentially from the Chattanooga River up Murphy Dome Road and leading into the university. So that's about 32 miles, going off memory. And I believe the cost was upwards of $350 to $370 million for that. But I will be glad to respond to the group with that actual number. But again, that was based on 2015 cost estimate and design. It's stated.
I can't help but put on record, because I am a Fairbanks, and also part of the original plan was that the cost would be integral, quote unquote, to the project, not something that Fairbanks has had to shoulder all on their own. Regarding the LNG plant, I just can't remember, how much were they shipping? The old BP.
So you're talking about the ConocoPhillips,
The ConocoPhillips, sure.
So their export was about 1.1 million tons per year of LNG export. So compare that to our design, which is at 20 million. quite a bit larger, directly adjacent to it. And the market that the Kenai LNG plant was selling into was Tokyo Gas, Tokyo Electric, and those long-term relationships that we have with the Japanese are still very solid and very firm.
I see. Oh, okay, okay. I did. That's the first time I've heard the relative scale between the existing legacy plant down in the inlet and what this new facility would be, what the capacity of it would be. Gene.
Frank, actually, what was my question? Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, I forgot my question.
All right. Well, again, just a reminder, if anyone has any questions online, the floor will be yours. Thanks, Frank.
Next slide, please, Shane. All right,
Oh,
so you
here we go.
jumped ahead to the price, the cost estimate, again, for this 42-inch from the North Slope to the Cook Inlet system without compressor stations, and what we call a Class 4 plus cost estimate. And that's really based on the design work that we have done, that ExxonMobil did, that Enbridge has reviewed. We feel that the 10.8 is a good solid number. However, it will take some additional front-end engineering and design to be able to complete that. That's about $50 million worth of work, where final testing of the pipe will be done, long lead item purchase orders will be put in place, construction, contracting, and execution plans will be updated, and then the project will be ready to take final investment decision. That's about 12 months to be able to accomplish. And that's why we were targeting a final investment decision in 2025, with the hopes that we will be able to attract the $50 million of investment this year, 2024. But ultimately, the goal is to be able to deliver gas to Alaskans. This pipeline project, again, we estimated to take about 4 years from final investment decision to first gas. Actual construction will be over about 3 winters and 2 summers. So it's really just the front end work to be able to get our contracts, finalize design, make sure we've got an updated cost estimate, and then be able to move this project forward. Next slide, please.
Actually, if you don't mind, sir.
Actually, Frank, so do you have the budgetary authority to actually receive that money and expend it? Or would you have to go to budget and audit or wait for the legislature if in fact you have a source of that money? Or you would be counting on those independent, entities to expend the money outside of your corporate being?
More the latter, Gene. So what Gene's talking about is AGDC, or the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation, is a state of Alaska corporation. So we are an instrumentality of the state of Alaska. We're not an executive branch organization, but we're set up distinct to be able to move forward with the development of a project, but also to divest ownership rights in that project. And so the legislature gave us the ability to create subsidiaries, and we have created what we call H-Star Alaska as a subsidiary. That will be the vehicle that will own and operate the project going forward. AGDC will retain an ownership percentage within that LLC, but the private sector funds can be brought into that LLC and expended at their direction, at their time frames. So that's the avenue, Gene. So we don't have to seek legislative authority to go out and receive $50 million and then expend it. Folks will buy into the H-Star Alaska LLC and be able to then drive the project forward.
So it occurs to me, again, $10.8 billion for the pipeline itself, but there is some pre-processing, at least some minimum pre-processing necessary, I assume, on the North Slope.
Jim, I'll ask you to hold that thought until
Okay.
you get to hear from Pat.
Okay. All right, we all good, everybody? All right, well then moving along.
All right, so for us, again, we talked to Fairbanks a couple of years ago during the pandemic when we were looking at the opportunity when there was the infrastructure bill was running through Congress, and they were looking for permitted projects to be able to move energy and put people to work. At that point, we were looking at utilizing Point Thompson gas with a pipeline from Point Thompson to Prudhoe Bay to Fairbanks. So this phase one concept that we're talking about today has been around for a couple of years. However, with the onset of the challenges of delivery of natural gas from Cook Inlet and the opportunity that utilities are looking at to supply with liquefied natural gas imports, we know that we need an economically viable project that will provide gas to Alaskans at or below the cost of imported LNG. So we need to make sure, as I said earlier, that we've got the utilities on board and signing contracts. We've got industrial customers such as Nutrien to be able to restart their plant. And that's how we'll be able to deliver gas to meet that marker of imported LNG. So it doesn't mean that we are forgoing the full Alaska LNG project. We're continuing to work with private investors to be able to come into that project and take that on. And their ultimate goal is again going to be the LNG export capability and the revenues that they see that will be generated. However, building the phase one of this project with a pipeline significantly reduces the perceived risk, the construction risk that has always been associated with this Alaska project. Because most other LNG projects are tidewater, and they don't require very long pipeline to be able to deliver gas to the project. So that has been a challenge, not only an economic disadvantage for the state of Alaska, but also a construction challenge, because folks see Alaska and our Arctic conditions as insurmountable to construct a pipeline. Even though we built TAPS 50 years ago, and we say that it can be done. Building this first phase significantly de-risks the project, but also increases the outlook for investment coming into the project. So we see that as a major positive going forward. Next slide, please, Jim. So here I'd like to introduce Pat Galvin, Chief Commercial Officer and General Counsel from Pantheon Resources, Great Bear Pantheon. And he'll talk a little bit about the prospects and ultimately what that means to this first phase of the Alaska LNG project and the opportunity to deliver gas from the North Slope to Alaska.
Thanks, Frank. And this is an opportunity to, I think, reintroduce the project for those who have been following it for the past 14 years and bring you up to speed on where we are with this exciting project. Let's go to the next slide, Joe. I'll cover the history going back to the beginning of Great Bear, bring you up to speed on our current project areas, talk about our geologic targets, and specifically our Appoon project, which is our most near-term development project. We'll talk a little bit about where we go next with our wells and then the gas commercialization stuff that we're really focused on for today. Next slide. I'll go through this pretty fast and we can come back with the questions as needed. This kind of gives you a snapshot of the last 14 years of the project. On the left, it gives you a sort of orientation of where we are on the slope. We are directly south of Prudhoe and Kapparik, right along the Dalton TAPS corridor. Our Appoon project, as you'll see, straddles that corridor on the east side of our acreage position. We sit about between, I think the closest is about 10 miles south of Dead Horse, stretching down to about 18 miles south of Dead Horse along the Dalton, and then spreading out to the west. We've acquired over 1,000 square miles of 3D seismic over that area and used that to identify where the prospect areas are for more conventional plays. And I'll just note that we started out as an unconventional project where we were looking at developing a oil project directly from the source rocks, similar to what they're doing in the lower 48 with shale plays and such. After we confirmed our geologic model and found that the oil is there, we recognize that the economics of a shale play doesn't really work in a new field where you have to pay for all of the infrastructure and cover the cost of the roads and the pipelines and the entire build out. The margins for a resource play would make it very difficult to handle all of that front end costs. And so we moved quickly back in 2013 to focus on where there might be more conventional reservoirs within our project area. And fortunately, we've identified a number. You can see on the right panel, the wells that we've drilled over really the last 12 years, starting with a couple stratigraphic test wells back in 2012, and then beginning in 2015 with our more conventional exploration wells looking for those reservoirs. Across our acreage position, we've discovered over 20 billion barrels of oil in place. So the oil is there in huge volumes. The question since those discoveries is really, can we get it out in an economic manner? Can we get the reservoir to react in a way that allows the wells to be productive enough to be economic? Why don't we move on to the next slide? And just to note that we've spent over $300 million to date on the seismic and the wells and such. Next slide, Gemma. So our target areas sit primarily within what's known as the Brookian interval. On the eastern side of our acreage position is the shallower targets. We refer to this area as our Apun project, named after a favorite polar bear at the Alaska Zoo some years ago. We have a number of wells that have gone into the Apun target interval. We've had a number of production tests and have sold hundreds and I think thousands of barrels of oil out of those. And off to the west, our Kodiak project is a much larger reservoir, a little bit deeper, and has a much larger potential recoverable area with about 1.2 billion barrels identified as recoverable by a third-party Netherlands Sewell, and over 5 TCF of gas in the Kodiak field. On the Apun side, we're now up to going on 400 million barrels of recoverable from third-party estimates and about 1.2 TCF of gas. But we still have a lot of appraisal that we're doing that could substantially increase those numbers for the Apun project. And I think the last thing to note is that with the Kodiak project, one of the interesting unexpected developments is that the target interval sits between 2 shale zones that have radioactive qualities, which results in a somewhat unique circumstance where it is developing helium. And we did find helium samples in our well samples from the test wells out in that area, and we're going to continue to pursue whether or not there's a potential helium development project in conjunction with our oil and gas project. Next slide.
I'm getting new bits, a bunch of new bits today. That's the first time I've heard helium mentioned.
Yeah, it's a unique. It's something that would be unique to our project. It's not a North Slope wide thing. It's just that we happen to be squeezed in between the radioactive zones.
Hmm.
Okay, next slide. Getting there. So focusing in on the Apun project, we really have three primary target areas, three different distinct geologic zones that we're looking at. Starting with the deeper one, what we call the Apun Alkade. This is right along the road system. We've got multiple penetrations through the Alkade zone, including our long-term production test that we conducted back in 2022 over the course of the summer, producing from a long-range lateral multi-stage frac at our pad that sits right adjacent to the Dalton Highway. Above that is what we call our topset play, and that stretches all the way down to the south and circles back towards the road again. And that's most likely going to be our first development area. It's got better porosity permeability numbers from the wells that we have down there, and we're going to be undertaking a longer term production test down there next winter. And then probably our most exciting opportunity is our topset play to the east. And this is basically an extension of the topsets that we see up at Alkade. And then as we move towards the east, they become shallower. And from a geologic sense, we're expecting to have even better reservoir qualities as we move out into that eastern topset play. We tested the topset at the Alkade. It wasn't, it was at the sort of feather edge of the western topset play, but the results were very favorable and made us very excited about the opportunity to move slightly east and see what we have out there. So we'll be testing that one either next winter or summer, with a large resource opportunity that sits out there underneath the Sag River. And the fortunate thing is that we can reach it from wells that would be located on the Dalton side of the Sag River.
Hey, Pat, can I mention one thing again on the charts that he's showing? There's two distinct lines that go from essentially top to bottom. That represents the Dalton Highway and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So that's the very important aspect, is that this prospect is directly adjacent to existing infrastructure, which is extremely valuable. So no additional roads to be built necessary to be able to.
Thanks, Frank. And I'll also note that that's the same corridor where the AKLNG project has its right of way. It runs right down through this area adjacent to the Dalton Highway. Next slide.
This is all north of the Brooks Range, correct?
Yes, significantly north of the Brooks Range. If anybody's been up there, if you drive south of Dead Horse, just within the first half hour, you'll see a big formation across the Sag River, which is referred to as Franklin Bluffs. And we sit directly on the Dalton side of the Sag River across from Franklin Bluffs.
Okay. And are there any permanent habitated sites near here?
No.
Other than those developed, in the oil and gas industry. I'm asking if there's any villages close by.
No, that's one of the advantages that we have from a permitting perspective, is that we're far away from any of the villages. We're outside of any of their subsistence use areas. Okay. And we're also far from the sensitive habitats that have occupied our oil fields since we started moving into NPRA. And and looking at ANWR. We're far removed from those. I think we're about 40 miles east of the NPRA and a similar 35 or so miles west of ANWR. So we sit far removed from those sensitive habitat areas.
More
Okay.
also, you sit on state of Alaska lands, not federal.
Yep, entirely on state of Alaska lands,
Don't
saying where it's safe.
Oh, you guys are saying all the right things this morning. Okay.
Next slide. So this is a photo of our Alkaid pad. As I mentioned, you can see the Dalton Highway is running from sort of the center of the photo down to the right. Back in the distance behind that is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, which is buried along our project area. But you can see the service road that sits atop of the pipeline. And then beyond that is the Sag River. We're proposing to put a hot tap connection into the Trans-Alaska Pipeline just north of our Alkaid location. The pipeline crosses the Dalton Highway and switches and moves to the west side of the Dalton, and then continues on the west side up to Dead Horse. There's about maybe another 4 or 5 miles north of that crossover point. The pipeline goes above ground as it then approaches Dead Horse and connects to Pump Station 1. We would propose to put a small sales line from our Alkaid pad to that hot tap location, and then connect directly to the taps line for our oil, our produced oil. We have a number of permits to secure in order to move into development, but this would be a significantly different approach than what you've seen recently at Pika and at Willow, where they have much larger scale initial production facilities. We would be doing ours in a more modular and phased approach. We're looking at about a 250 to 300 million initial investment to get to first production. And that would involve having oil that would go into the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, and then any associated gas would be initially re-injected and stored until we had an offtake, and that brings us to the opportunity that the AK LNG project describes for us. Can we go to the next slide?
We do have a question, and thank you for that clarification, because I almost got the impression when we first started this conversation that you would not be able to, or would be not producing oil. And my question was going to be, if you're taking out gas, how would that impact the future potential to produce oil? But it sounds like, no, this is all of a package. And following what is the normal sequence?
Yeah, I don't know about normal sequence. Maybe it's normal for the North Slope, but
Oh, yeah.
we've always designed our project with the expectation that we'd have to handle the gas and re-inject it. And that's what our project economics are built upon. The opportunity to save that cost and actually sell the gas becomes just in and of itself an uplift to our project economics, to not have to add the compression to re-inject the gas, but the ability to sell it for a profit adds even more. So
and the one question in the chat was just relative to test wells, that you would be doing test wells this winter.
Yes.
Yeah.
The winter and into the spring and summer.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, absent an offtake, we would be re-injecting the gas and adding the cost associated with needing to add that capacity to handle the gas. And so we approached the ACAN LNG project a while ago to talk about opportunities that our project represented. And to answer one of your questions, Jomo, our gas has significantly lower CO2 naturally than what they have on the Prudhoe Park. We're looking at less than 1%, down to about 0.5%. And so we can strip out the CO2 to bring it down to LNG quality with fairly routine methodologies without the need for large conditioning plants or anything along those lines. And that's what allows us to have a timeline that would line up more directly with the AKLNG. And if we're just doing phase one without, if there is no LNG component on the downside of the pipe, then we're significantly below what the utility CO2 rates are even today.
Got it.
So we have offered to provide up to 0.5 BCF a day for up to $1 per MMBTU. That price, for those of us who have been in the game for a while, we've kind of always ballparked about $2 per MMBTU as kind of the North Slope base load because of the need for conditioning and other things, and what the producers have always told us. And so that's always been kind of the floor. But fortunately, because of the location of our project and the nature of our gas, we're able to provide it at a much lower cost than even that. And that's really what I think opened up the door for the phase one economics, is having our source that can start at a much lower initial feedstock rate. And then it's really the pipe cost that's going to establish what the price is for the end users. So we also have different options that we've discussed with AGDC and other parts of the state to lower that price even more for the consumer, and we'll be exploring those as we move through the next phase of the project. And I think that we kind of covered the rest already with this discussion. Next slide.
So refreshing to have an Alaskan working on a project. I know what the producers say, but I've been assured that they could limbo much, much lower and still make money on the price of their feedstock.
Yeah, we've been hearing that for years, haven't we? And it really, it's fun for me to be involved in this project after my past life, and seeing the opportunity that this project represents for this overall project. And as Frank said, watching how we can, through a phase one project, create an economic opportunity that never existed before, where a full-scale LNG project becomes just a small step forward, as opposed to having to swallow the whole project economics and the risks way ahead of time. So I do think that this is a significant game changer in the overall project opportunity and economics.
So I noticed that we are coming near the top of the hour.
Yeah.
I have nothing scheduled after this. I'm more than happy to keep going. Are you gentlemen still available? We doing good?
I've got about another 15 minutes or so before I've got to start heading to head to the airport for a flight.
Okay. All right. Well, then we will rock and roll.
I think I'm just about done. So we're back to any follow-up slides that, I don't know, Frank, you had anything that you needed to cover? Or
There's just a couple. I wanted to give an update on the GSPA, so that's the next slide.
oh,
Sure.
sure, let's go to it.
So what's exciting for me to hear about what Pantheon is doing in the Great Bear prospects there is that, and it's directly along existing infrastructure, but the build out of this and the opportunity there is so tremendous, and what that will mean ultimately to Alaskans and Alaskans' economy as you see additional oil and gas sector jobs that will be created from this. The industry that supports the oil and gas industry will really benefit from it as well. And then with those volumes that Pat's talking about, the opportunity to increase the flow on taps just puts us in a significantly better position as a state. So that's why it's very exciting to hear what they're doing. What Pat described, again, with the opportunities there at Great Bear, the discussions that we've been having, we actually entered into what is known as the Gas Sales Precedent Agreement with Great Bear. So AGDC and Great Bear signed this GSPA last week. It provides for up to 500 million shares, so significantly more than we see for the in-state needs as what we currently project. And that price of up to $1 is, as you heard, less than what we've been talking about in public setting or what we've heard about from the producers for years. So that's a major game changer for lower cost gas that will be available then to Alaskans. So this is the gas supply, the low cost gas supply that I talked about that we will need to be able to get to a successful final investment decision. Now, whether or not it's needed, there may be the line of sight to back up gas supply to ensure pipeline financing, but that's where we're in continued discussions and negotiations with producers at Thompson, Prudhoe Bay about the gas supply for this first phase. So next slide, please. So in terms of the interconnection, these are the offtakes where gas would be supplied not only to Fairbanks and the interior Alaska, but also in the South Central. So on the left-hand panel, you see here's where, again, just to the west of the Chattanooga, is where the Fairbanks lateral connection is located. And I wanted to give an update. I was able to do a quick review of a cost that was significantly high in my estimate that I provided earlier. The lateral is designed is a 30-mile, 12-inch below ground pipeline that has a total installed cost in 2015 dollars of about $175 million. So looking at that, looking at the flow of gas that we estimated through that represents about 10 cents for a tariff on gas on that portion of the right. The panel on the right is where the Alaska LNG project pipeline would interconnect with the NSTAR existing Beluga pipeline and then feed both north and south into the South Central Alaska to supply the each utilities. And next slide, please. So what AGDC, at the behest of the legislature, is doing right now is we are contracting with an independent third party to be able to look at this prospect of phase one and what it will mean to the state of Alaska. As you heard Pat talk about, they've had independent third parties look at the developments that they're undertaking. This was a request by the legislature to do something similar so that they get an independent review of this project to see the value and benefits to the state of Alaska. So this actually came out in the budget bill, House Bill 258, that's sitting on the governor's desk for signature, and it will be able to look at the delivered cost of natural gas from this phase one prospect to South Central and interior markets. It will try and identify the economic benefits to the state of Alaska through this initial through this initial phasing of the project, and then look at the viability on how that it will benefit in the full Alaska LNG project. The legislature requested that this report be done and provided to them by December 20th of this year. So right now we're in final discussions with that third party. So I see that there's a question about who that third party is, and we hope to be able to announce them very shortly and get that work kicked off and be able to report to the legislature sooner than December. Next slide. So as I've talked about, the advantages of phase one is, again, long-term energy security, lower cost gas for Alaskans. Again, a new source of gas from the North Slope certainly helps to reinvigorate our oil and gas industry. The downstream, with the restart opportunities for, say, the nutrient ammonia plant, that's a major economic lift to bring long-term, well-paying jobs back to South Central Alaska. The goal is to be able to provide pipeline gas to Fairbanks, ultimately to reduce your costs, improve your air quality, but also hopefully then to reinvigorate the economic opportunities within interior Alaska with a lower cost energy source. And then long term, as we move from a phased pipeline project to the full Alaska LNG project, and we're able to flow 3.3 billion cubic feet of gas through the pipeline, that will ultimately drive the cost of energy down from what we talked about earlier, down towards that $4 to $5 per million BTU delivered to Alaskans. So that's the real game changer here for Alaskans is currently South Central is paying about $9 per million BTU, so it cuts it in half. Fairbanks, let's say on a $4 diesel equivalent of about $30 per million BTU, you can see that lowers your cost substantially. So we see the value of this to Alaskans going forward, and we hope that we're able to meet the standard of providing this project to Alaska. And one quick pitch as I wrap up, Jomo and folks, is we're going to be having our board of directors meeting in Fairbanks on this Thursday, the 13th. We'll be at the Pipeline Training Center starting at 5:30. We'll be able to present it then for the public to be able to come and hear. We'll be hearing many of the same information that Pat and I presented today, but also how we're progressing on the full Alaska Energy project. And I bring this up because we will likely have folks from the Fairbanks Climate Action Committee who will take the opportunity to come to the meeting and present their case for why the pipeline is not necessary. So it might be helpful to be able to hear from folks that have a different point of view and how pipeline for Alaskans will be extremely beneficial.
Okay, just to confirm, you said Thursday, and that it would be at 5:30 starting? 5:30. Okay, at the Pipeline Training Center. With permission or without, I'll go ahead and send that out with the recap notice to let people know that that's something, if anyone part of the task force wants to come visit and listen in, that's the opportunity. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Jomo. And the next slide is really just how to contact us or get the latest information on the Alaska LNG project.
Okay. All right, Mr. Terrio.
Just Pat, before you go, a quick question. Your oil reserves, is it a pressurized field with heavy oil, light oil? What's the quality? And just so we get an idea of the cost of getting that potentially into the line.
Sure. Thanks, Gene. It's actually very high quality light oil. We've got somewhere between an API gravity of 36 and upwards of 40 that we've already produced. And it's our end product is actually going to be a combination of the crude oil and NGLs, the lighter. We have a very rich gas that's going to be coming associated with the oil, and we'll strip out a number of the higher end products and send that with the oil, as many of the other fields do along the taps, and get our quality bank adjustment upwards because of that. And then the methane will be kept and ultimately used for the AKLNG project.
And for Frank, Frank, you highlighted the target of getting the cost for gas at the flange down to that $4 or $5. But realistically, if you were able to knit this all together, what do you think your starting cost would be? And is it and what size industrial use are you counting on to initially have
That price.
So what we are in discussions with utilities and Nutrien is, and I'll put in yearly volume. So the utilities currently all in consume about 75 billion cubic feet a year. We're at for Nutrien to restart, they'll need about 50 billion cubic feet a year. So in grand total, that's about 125 billion cubic feet. That represents nearly 300 million standard cubic feet a day. As I said, the marker that we have is we need to beat the price of imported LNG. So that's ranging north of $15 to $16 to $17. So our estimates, our economic model is based on delivery to Alaskans in that $14 range for the utility customers. And for the industrial base load, we'll be offering it to them at around $5 to be able to provide for the initial base load demand. As volumes go up in the pipeline due to expansion for LNG or additional industrial needs, that means that that $14 target for utilities will go down, ultimately to that, say, $4 to $5 when we get the full Alaska LNG project. The price for the industrial customer will stay at that initial base load price. We just need to be able to have that 50 billion cubic feet of demand to be able to make the economics work for this initial phase.
And are there any remaining legal challenges to the permits that you have in hand, or has everything been run its course and you're ready to go with all the permitting?
So there were 3 legal challenges. The first one was against the FERC authorization, and that ran through the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. with a 3-judge panel who unanimously struck down the plaintiff's arguments around that the environmental process wasn't followed and the requirement wasn't considered. The Department of Energy authorization, the same plaintiffs, the Center for Biological Diversity and Sierra Club, filed very similar complaints in the same district court against the Department of Energy authorization. Again, the Biden administration, the Department of Justice are coming out in vehement support of this authorization. We actually did a supplemental environmental impact statement where we looked at the life cycle greenhouse gas analysis from this and showed that it will be removing nearly, let's say, 200 billion cubic feet of CO2 a year from emissions in Asia by supplanting LNG into Asia as a fuel source. So positive climate impacts and greenhouse gas elimination. So we feel very confident in that. And then most recently, it was our Children's Trust who filed an action in state court against the state of Alaska, AGDC, and myself regarding the impacts to 8 children within the state of Alaska. But this is a similar case that had previously gone to the Alaska Supreme Court on a facial argument and was struck down. So I feel very confident that this one will be struck down by the court as well.
All right, good questions, Gene. All right, well, we are past the top of the hour. I know that Commissioner Galvin has to go here in about 2 seconds. Do we have any final questions from the assemblage? All right, seeing none. Mr. Richards, Mr. Galvin, thank you so much for this presentation, and thank you for your continuing efforts. Yeah, it's very exciting news. All right, everybody. So you can expect you'll be getting a recap here soon. I will include the note relative to the AGDC board meeting here in Fairbanks on Thursday. And I'll let you know if we have any other presentations coming along. I'm trying to nail down one. Speaking of industrial users, potential industrial users along the route, trying to get a presentation with folks relative to the Ambler Mining District and road. So I'll give you updates on that if I can nail them down. All right, well, beyond that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Thanks again. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your efforts in the presentation. Hey, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon for the next Energy for All Alaska Task Force.